Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It's the end of day 4 of Space Team's Mission Oz. Let us know in the comments, how did it go today? What are you working on? So, Christy, we have another exciting guest speaker back here tonight that we're going to bring on in just a minute. How are you feeling today?
Super excited. Always a privilege to get to meet with someone with such an amazing history.
Absolutely. So, we have a few reminders before we introduce our guest speaker. Make sure, guys, that you submit on the learning platform in the community your team video, your team photo, and your team mission patch. They are due tomorrow on day 5, right before the speaker presentation. That gets you eligible for some special awards on the last day. Also, make sure that you go back and submit all your scores from each day and verify that you are on the leaderboard of spacecraft. You don't want to miss out on that leaderboard, guys. So make sure you submit those scores. Okay, how is it going today? Christy, do we have any comments?
Just a little bit. Sounds like things are a little bit difficult. Keep practicing, guys. They're keeping an eye on those scores. They are working on landing that spacecraft, saying it takes a lot of skill. Absolutely.
Well, that's good. I'm glad it's a challenge.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure we're going to learn more about how challenging it is in the real world in just a minute. So, as you guys are still commenting, we're going to start off with a special video. All right, guys, how cool was that? We are going to talk about our guest speaker for a minute and then bring him on. We're excited to introduce you to astronaut Gregory H. Box Johnson. He's an American former Air Force officer and pilot, aerospace engineer, fighter test pilot, MBA, and NASA astronaut, of course. While in the Air Force, he logged over 5,000 flight hours and more than 50 different aircraft. He served as the pilot and primary robotic arm operator of STS-123, as well as the pilot of STS-134, the final flight of Endeavour, personally delivering the most important particle detector ever designed to further the fundamental understanding of our universe. Astronaut Johnson served as a Capcom for several missions, including the final Hubble flight, and was the astronaut representative to the external tank foam impact test team that eventually proved that the external tank foam debris on ascent could critically damage the shuttle's leading edge thermal protection system. While at NASA, he supported the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, was chief of the Astronaut Safety Branch, crew representative for Crew Exploration Vehicle, a display designer for the Shuttle Cockpit Avionics Upgrade Program, division chief for External Communications and STEM, and was lead of ISS Visiting Vehicles team. From 2013 to 2018, Astronaut Johnson served as the president and executive director of the Center for the Advancement of Science and Space. He now serves as an aerospace consultant and STEM advocate. All right, let's bring him on. It's astronaut Greg Johnson. Welcome.
Hi, Claire. How are you doing? I can't see you because I'm sharing my screen with you,
I
but
got it.
I remember chatting with you these last several presentations, and congratulations to you and your team for running such a very important program that affects kids all over the planet. And I'd also like to congratulate everyone for completing, just about completing the program and for designing your spaceship. And we'll talk a little bit about spaceships and airplanes today. So,
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share your presentation and you can get started.
okay, sounds great.
Go ahead.
Okay, so there I was with Greg Chomutov floating in space a little bit over a decade ago. And I understand Greg has been presenting with you. I'm going to share a little bit different perspective. Greg was probably the smartest astronaut on our crew, but I was the pilot, so I have a little bit different perspective than the very smart mission specialists that we had on board. So I like to start off with the slide to remind ourselves that the space program has only been around for less than my lifetime, really. And we've accomplished a lot. We've walked on the moon. Right now, we've got the International Space Station that's been up there 3 decades and close to it, and then looking forward to going to Mars in the future. For me, it started when I was 7 years old at my grandparents' house in 1969. I watched in amazement as Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon. I was very grateful to my parents who woke me and my brother and sister up past our bedtime so that could plant that seed of inspiration of always dreaming of being an astronaut. So before I kind of press on with the presentation, I want to talk a little bit about somebody who inspired me. Each of us on this call have been inspired by different people, our family members, our teachers, our friends, our associates. My dad, he was probably one of the greatest inspirations for me. He was a musician, a band leader for the U.S. Air Force. He also was a service-oriented person supporting Rotary and many other behind the scenes things that helped us three kids fly. So I have a short video to share my memory of my dad. He passed away in 2004 before my first space flight. Here's to my dad. So that looks like a musical baton to me. The music is the British 8th March. In zero gravity, non-uniform objects rotate differently. So hats off to my dad, looking down from us from above. Okay, so fast forward from being a 7-year-old, now I had just graduated from high school. That's my photo on the left from high school, and then went off to pilot training. I was a few pounds lighter than I am now. Earned my pilot wings and went off to fly airplanes. This is one of the first airplanes I flew in the Air Force as an instructor, but we also were flying those T-38s, a little bit more current version, the T-38Ns at NASA for many years. I then went on to fly the Strike Eagle. It's a fourth generation fighter, and we had the Persian Gulf War back in the 90s. So I got some combat time, and I got to experience probably the best technology of the time in the late 90s. This is a four ship of T-38s. It's actually the four airplanes that Greg Chomutov and I took to the Cape on our first opportunity to launch on Space Shuttle Endeavour. And now I am flying this airplane. It's sort of like starting in the Air Force, doing a full career, Then I flew a desk. I joke about that with the CASIS, the Center for the Advancement of Science and Space. But I went back to flying recently, testing these cool airplanes, and they're very, it's still a fourth generation fighter. It's not like the F-35, but really amazing avionics and technology advancement since I was flying fighters 2 decades ago. I bring this, I show this photograph as I talk about inspiration points. Charlie Bolden was the NASA administrator when we landed from STS-134, but he was also one of the big motivators for me before I even joined NASA, and he challenged me to go to test pilot school and apply for the astronaut corps. Our class had a whole bunch of astronauts at that time. We had about 75 astronauts join within 2 years, and we all look a lot younger. That was back in 1998. But eventually, almost 10 years later, I got assigned my first shuttle flight on STS 123 as the pilot. We launched at night. It was a crazy ride. And as a pilot, the space shuttle is very automated, but all of the systems, many of the systems have manual backups where the pilot and commander can navigate the vehicle to space and then back to the Earth. Approaching the space station, we brought a couple payloads with us up to the space station as we were building the International Space Station. There were about 35 to 40, depending on how you count, space shuttle missions taking pieces up to space, building the space station by hand over a period of 20 years or so. Actually, not quite that much, about 15 years. And, the space station now is still in operation, as you know. We took up the Canadian hand, the special purpose dexterous manipulator. And that's what the space station looked like in 2008 when we left on Space Shuttle Endeavour's 21st mission. You might note that the solar arrays, that's how the space station gets its electricity. It's missing one in 2008 that will later come up before our second flight together with me and Taz. Second shuttle flight was STS-134. It was the last flight of Endeavour. Everybody had flown in space previously, and our commander, Mark Kelly, in the front, we're doing our Star Trek copycat pose, and I don't think I'm looking much like Spock. But anyway, Mark Kelly, who is now a senator for Arizona, was leading this on his fourth space shuttle mission. It was a day launch. It was the final flight of Endeavour. Shuttle launches are incredible. 7 million pounds of thrust, accelerating at an increasing rate up to low Earth orbit. It took about 8.5 minutes to get up to 17,500 miles an hour in low Earth orbit. And then we do some orbital mechanics to circularize our orbit and eventually join up on the International Space Station. That's about 90 seconds after liftoff. We're through the sound barrier now, and you can see the clouds below. It was interesting. Both of my shuttle flights were through cloud decks that probably exceeded NASA's requirements. So we had a night launch where it was spectacular with the light illuminating on the clouds, but this flight was no exception. We launched just after dawn. It was very placid and peaceful in the oceans, and then blasting through the clouds on the way to the International Space Station. Approaching the space station, and note all these photos are taken from people on the space shuttle or space station. This particular photo was taken by Katie Coleman as we joined up on STS-134. As Claire mentioned, the alpha magnetic spectrometer was one of our most important payloads, not only for our mission, but for the entire space station program. It's collected now over 200 billion cosmic particles. They've discovered, or they've not discovered, they've observed naturally occurring antimatter, and the models of our universe are being altered by this experiment on its own. So that's what the space station looked like in 2011, after those some odd 35 shuttle flights as we were departing. You can see the AMS on the top of the space station. And I'll talk a little bit more about the space station a little bit later. But first, some amazing photographs from space. These are the two Soyuz capsules that were attached to the International Space Station. We were there, but in the background you can see beautiful aurora borealis and the reds that you only see in a textbook here on the Earth. We had Russians up there as well as U.S. astronauts. In the foreground, that is our cycle ergometer. It's basically a bicycle that you can pedal in space. And so we as a crew use that ergometer every day. I once pedaled all the way around the Earth, 92 minutes around the Earth. And if you look closely, you can see the picture of one of our trainers that I taped to the front of that ergometer. This is sleeping in space. Everything is fun in space. Sleeping is no exception. And of course, Taz there as an Eagle Scout is prepared with his headlamp as we turn out the lights. The coastlines of our planet are just unbelievable as we orbit around the Earth every 90 minutes. We cover about 95% of the populated land masses on the planet, and everything is so beautiful from space. The photographs just don't do it justice. That's a hurricane wannabe coming off the west coast of Africa. I don't know if it actually turned into a tropical storm or not. Mount Everest from space, it's 29,000 feet high, but when you're up at 200 nautical miles, you can't tell that that's the highest point on the planet. This is one of my favorite places on the planet. This is where my grandparents' house is in northern Michigan. And it took 2 shuttle flights, 32 days in space, to get the opportunity to see this beautiful lake directly below us. It was an 82-degree overflight, just darn near right over the center of the lake. This is about 6 seconds later. You can see the lake on the bottom left and the beautiful city of Traverse City, Michigan, and the 2 Grand Traverse Bays. About 30 seconds later, I'm looking back over my shoulder. Now we're over the state of New York, but you can still see Long Lake and Traverse City using a telephoto lens. We also did some entertainment in space. We looked out the windows, and this is the first on-orbit makeshift band. I think we were probably annoying to our crewmates as we played Brown-Eyed Girl not very well. And there you have it, the beautiful space station that we lived on for 2 weeks, each time in 2 shuttle flights. So the International Space Station is probably one of the greatest engineering achievements of our civilization. There are modules from 15 different nations represented around the world. We've got laboratories. We took up those trusses individually. We have experiments. We have solar arrays. The Japanese laboratory was one of the great additions to the International Space Station, and STS-123, we actually took that module up with us to space. The Japanese also have an external platform where we can do experiments in the vacuum of space. So the International Space Station is a microgravity laboratory, one of a kind. You can't get zero gravity here on the Earth, but in space we get continuous microgravity. And taking gravity out of the physical or biological system fundamentally changes the way things interact with each other. Genes express differently, cells interact differently, crystals grow larger and more perfect, and we can study so many things on the International Space Station that you just can't study here on the Earth. But also at the bottom of the space station, there's the beautiful cupola. It's a bay window looking down at our planet, so we can observe many different features of our planet from the position up in low Earth orbit. So technology development, science advancement, Earth observation, and with the AMS observing the rest of our universe, as well as inspiring millions of kids all around the world to pursue STEM degrees and jobs in the future. You know, I really consider you kids out there, you youth, the really the space generation. Your entire lives, people have been living and working on the International Space Station. And so it's a special time where your civilization has now taken the step out to a permanent presence in space. And as you know, as a planet, we intend to go out to the moon, to colonize parts of the moon, to have a lunar base, and eventually go to Mars and other places in our solar system. I'm going to close by talking a little bit about the piloting task, because that's what Taz really wants me to focus on with you all. And oh, by the way, this is our flight on 134, the very final shuttle flight, and both Taz and I are asleep as the Soyuz undocked and took this beautiful photograph. So the space shuttle, just like your vehicles that you've been designing, it's a spaceship out in space, in the vacuum of space. It's got thrusters, as you know. And but as we enter into the atmosphere, we have to transition to some more aerodynamic surfaces to execute the landing task. So this is what the shuttle cockpit looked like. And there's lots of switches, there's lots of displays, but all of those displays that you see in front of you are actually an upgrade from the original shuttles. And you can reconfigure this shuttle cockpit however you like to get the information that you need. This is the jet fighter that I'm flying. Actually flew last week. I wanted to fly this week. The flight got canceled. But you can see the same sorts of information that are available to a fighter pilot are also available to the crew members on the space shuttle. So the space shuttle, as I said, it's whizzing around the Earth 17,500 miles an hour in the upper left. And then what we do is we flip around and slow down just enough so we can drop into the atmosphere. Once we start entering into the atmosphere, we quick turn ourselves around so we are facing the oncoming wind and the heating that is a result of that down on the bottom left. We do a series of S turns to try to give ourselves as many options as possible to land where we intend to, while still leaving other options open. And then finally, as a glider, we came in to land. This will show you a few of the orbits that we would have on the space shuttle as we're going around the Earth. And you can imagine each one of these tracks, the Earth is rotating for 90 minutes. And so that's the difference between the width of these tracks. So it's precisely timed so that we pick one of those tracks that allows us to land where we want to land. And in this case, of course, we're wanting to go back to Florida at Kennedy Space Center. The ground tracks for the space shuttle are infinite, really, depending on how you execute the deorbit burn. But in general, you're coming in this, from either the northernmost angle to the southernmost angle, and of course, ending up at Kennedy Space Center. The way we align ourselves with the runway, and you can see the two depictions there, is with a heading alignment cone. So as we transition from thrusters to aerodynamics, and we start flying it really like a glider, just a very high drag glider, we maneuver ourselves to the heading alignment cone so that we can get lined up with the runway. We also are precisely covering our descent rate such that we, as a glider, have the heart of the envelope ability to land on the runway the very first time. And of course, you got to land the first time because there are no go-arounds with the space shuttle. And probably that's the same case with many of your your spaceship designs. We had a head-up display on the space shuttle in the front. You could see, very much like the fighters that were flying, the information with the altitude and the airspeed and the flight path marker. That's where we're pointed. And of course, we're aiming short of the runway so that when we get about 2,000 feet, we pull our noses up toward the runway, slow down about 100 knots, put the gear down, and then land at the beginning of the runway at about 195 knots. Here's a head-up display for the airplane I'm flying on the right, and another head-up display on the left. And so again, the sorts of information that we use in modern fighters are valuable and were valuable for the space shuttle as well. And here we are coming into a landing. Now it's a lot like an airplane. You know, the space shuttle had a fly-by-wire system. It was very much like the flight control system that I'm flying with the F-16 and what the F-35 has and the other modern fighters. And it flew very much like the simulator. And honestly, the control authority and the stick and rudder of flying the space shuttle is very much like a very modern airplane. Again, once we hit the ground, we realize, okay, we're sitting a lot higher than we normally were in fighters. And of course, putting out the drag chute to slow ourselves down. Of course, the runway was 15,000 feet long. So, you know, again, NASA does overkill. And we want to have lots of redundancy and lots of margin for the systems on our space shuttles. So with that, I'm showing you a picture of Orion. And Orion is going to be this next spaceship that hopefully we're going to get to orbit here in another month or so. I'm really excited. I've been working with the people at Johnson Space Center for that unmanned Artemis 1 mission and some of the technology for future cockpits for Artemis 2 and subsequent. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will turn it back over to Claire.
All right. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I'm going to make you big here so that nobody wants to look at us. But thank you so much for sharing what your experience has been on some amazing missions, and thank you for your service to our country.
Yeah.
We have some pre-submitted questions from some of the participants. Christy, do you mind sharing some of those questions?
I am ready. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Hi, Christy.
How are you, Greg? That was great. I got dizzy in the very beginning. You showed that video and you did and I had to close my eyes because it started making me a little sick. I don't know how you do what you do. Amazing. Okay, we've got some questions here. What is your favorite thing about your job? You do lots of cool things.
Okay, so my current job, my favorite thing about it is flying airplanes. It's always been my passion. I started flying airplanes in college to actually be a better aeronautical engineer, and then found out that I was probably better at flying airplanes than being an aeronautical engineer. And so while smart people like Taz went to MIT, I went off to fly airplanes and eventually brought the engineering into flying as a test pilot. So, but that's really my favorite part of my job. And honestly, flying the space shuttle is a part of that.
That's wonderful. Is it getting harder or easier?
That's actually a good question. So I'm not the young, I'm not the oldest pilot around, but I've been around a few years, and I'll tell you what, pulling G's, in a 9G jet, that's challenging, but it's part of my job.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Well, we had another question from the live stream. Do stars look different in space than they do on Earth?
They really don't. We're not much closer to the stars in low Earth orbit. We're only 250 nautical miles closer. The space station has a lot of light, emits a lot of light. And so it's pretty similar to being in a city here on the ground. If you really get a lucky dark look, you could see, notice that the stars maybe don't twinkle as much as they do on the Earth, but pretty much it's the same.
Okay.
I've got another one here. What was it like going from a normal plane to a spacecraft?
Well, I'll answer it in two ways. Emotionally, it was very similar to going to combat in an airplane when we launched in space for the first time. We were well prepared, we were confident, but we just didn't know what it was going to look like on the other side. And then once it happened, we executed the mission and looked back and realized that we were ready and prepared. So emotionally, when we were on the launch pad for both shuttle missions, it was very similar to my first combat mission. As far as operating an aerospace vehicle, a lot of the same sorts of things that I did as a pilot in the airplanes, we had to do in the space shuttle. The space shuttle is more of a crew airplane than the fighters that I was flying on the Earth. But again, a lot of the things that we did is coordination, communication, knowing your system, understanding the redundancy, and making sure that the system, the automated parts of the system, are doing their job.
All right. Sounds like a lot of maybe what the participants are experiencing in spacecraft.
Oh, absolutely. And these spacecrafts, there's two parts of it, and I don't know a lot of detail about your competition, but I think there's a design part of it and there's a flying part of it, right? And you
Yes.
got to get both of those right. So it's a challenge.
All right. Well, to piggyback off of that, somebody asked what types of screens are in the space shuttle cockpits?
Well, I showed you a picture of the cockpit. That's exactly what the shuttle looked like. There are a lot of switches. The shuttle had about 2,000 switches. Modern fighters don't have nearly that many. I think an F-35 might have 30 switches. But the multifunction displays, both monochrome and color, are very similar to what we're flying in fourth and fifth generation fighters and in airliners, for that matter.
Okay.
I like this one. What is something interesting about your job that most people don't know?
Something interesting about my job that people don't know. You might suspect this, but we get to meet a lot of interesting people when we're astronauts. And as crew members, we travel the world with Taz. Our crew, we went to Japan. I'm sorry, Italy, a couple times because we had an Italian astronaut, and we got to take our families there and meet many of the people in ESA. And then on my first shuttle flight, we went to Japan, and because we had a Japanese astronaut. And then there are other people that are interested that want to hear about it. So talk shows and other people, presidents and leaders of other countries. It's fun to meet the people that we get exposed to after being in space.
So those communication skills are really just as important as the math and the science, maybe.
They are. They really are. You have to be able to communicate. And honestly, the best engineers and scientists need to know how to communicate too, because they need to get their great ideas transferred to other people who can build things or manage things and organize other teams. So communication is key. Soft skills, very important.
Great insight. Okay. What was the coolest thing on Earth that you saw from space?
That's another one that I showed you in the video. The coolest thing by far was seeing Long Lake, Michigan, where I went every summer for my entire childhood, and where I just went last month to bring the docks out for the wintertime. And I think that's the most beautiful place on the planet. I hope to spend more summers there. Right now, I'm in Fort Worth, Texas, and the weather's beautiful in the fall and the spring. In the summer, though, I'd rather be in Michigan.
Have you taken a picture of the International Space Station from Michigan?
I have not. That's a great question, because I always tell people that. I say, hey, when you see the International Space Station, which everyone on this call, if you haven't seen the International Space Station, you should Google where it is and see it. It's amazing. But when you can see the International Space Station flying overhead, they can see you too, right? And I always tell people, yeah, you can see them, but they can see you. But they're taking pictures of the Earth, right? So why aren't we taking pictures of the space station? Great question. I guess my camera equipment's not good enough.
Maybe we'll work on that for next time.
Yes, ma'am.
Your video was such a sweet dedication to your father. I'm sure he was a huge inspiration. How would you answer this question? What motivates you the most?
So I would say if I was inspired, it would probably be my mom and dad. Probably what motivates me the most, though, is the advancement of technology and learning. We are all part of this big advancement of knowledge. And what motivates me is I want to be a part of it and share and elevate those around me so that we can learn new things and build the body of knowledge and our capability in all technology areas. But it also motivates me to talk to the younger generation, because you all are the ones that are going to be running with it over the next 5 decades. And many of you are going to be in high tech areas, and hopefully some of you will be to the moon and Mars. And so it motivates me. It's this long blue line that we're all a part of, to advance it and to bring the next generation along with us.
Absolutely. And to follow that, what is your biggest goal in your career?
My biggest goal in my career, I don't know.
What do you want to be when you grow up, I guess is
Yeah,
the
yeah,
question.
yeah. That's funny. So I think I'm executing goals at this point and not setting new goals. I don't think I'm going to get to go to Mars. I don't think my wife's going to let me fly in space again. She'll probably kill me first, right? Um, so probably my biggest goal now is to start the transition of bringing the next generation up with us. Watching my kids fly off in their careers and helping to motivate the next generation. So maybe that's my biggest goal now, is the transition to the younger folks like you.
Well, we appreciate you being here to help accomplish that. You have
Claire,
one
do we
more,
have time
Christy?
for one more? Yes.
Yes.
Let's do, if you had a time machine, where and when would you want to go back?
Oh man, I would want to go back to the Apollo days, the pre-moon landing days, and I'd want to be a fly on the wall. I would want to witness the human calculators. They calculated all those mathematical equations, by hand or with slide rules. I'd like to see how all that worked. It's interesting, on the space shuttle, we still, on those launches, and remember, the space shuttles are all in museums now, so we're old school, right? But on the space shuttle, we actually had calculated numbers written into our checklists as a backup, so we didn't lose that human calculation piece of NASA. I don't think they do it now on SpaceX and Starliner and Orion, but we did in the space shuttle. So, but I'd like to go back and see how that all worked. I would like to see, from the JFK days of motivating, NASA and NACA, until we made those lunar landings. Just an incredible time in our history.
Absolutely. Well, I have one last question for you that I always like to ask. If you were to give one piece of advice to the participants that are part of space teams right now, what would it be?
It would be, don't say no to yourself. Don't ever say no to yourself. When I was 7 years old, my brother and sister laughed at me when I wanted to be an astronaut. And I didn't think it was very likely. But what I didn't do is say no. It can't be done. Because as soon as you say no to yourself, then it's not going to happen. So keep your options open. Don't give up. Keep trying. And who knows, maybe, a kind of semi old, short, pudgy guy will get to be an astronaut someday. I'm just kidding, but I'm talking about myself here. But I'm just saying, I really didn't think I had a chance of being an astronaut. And I tried and tried and tried. And when I was in my late 30s, luckily, Taz and I got picked up for the astronaut class of 1998. So follow your dreams and don't say no to yourself.
Excellent advice. Well, thank you so much for all that you have shared. It sure is a pleasure having you here with us, and I know that the kids will be inspired by hearing your story.
Oh, thank you, Claire. Well, it's
Thank
been a lot of fun for me, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I really enjoy these interactions and getting to talk to kids all around the world. Thank you for bringing this opportunity to all of them and to me.
Awesome. Well, thank you, and everybody have a great night, and looking forward to seeing you back here tomorrow.
Good luck.